where Russia doesn't have the constant inflow of support, whether it's from the United States or many of the NATO countries. No one ever expected, especially not Putin. Putin never expected this to go on and last this long. He thought Ukraine would just be a lifeless dog that would roll over, and this would be over in a week or so. And like I said, here we are, 4 years later. Ukraine is still fighting strong. They're a very proud people, and they love their country, and you can't blame them.
Don Bramer, former Bush official, former naval intelligence officer, and Bramer Group chairman, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you.
We have to start off with Donald Trump and his team. They've been trying to work out a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. This week we saw Steve Witkoff, Marco Rubio, and Jared Kushner travel to Moscow to meet with Putin and the Kremlin. They came home basically saying that progress had been made, but they're a long way off from reaching an agreement. What do you make of all this back and forth, Don, between the US, Ukraine, and Russia? Do you think that Putin's taking them for a ride?
You can look at it that Putin may be trying to extend this out, but I was reading through the original agreement or deal that was put forward last year. We started with about 28 points, and right now we're at about 19. I believe that the president and this administration, in their first initial package, just as any salesman would do, they went for the sky. They went for everything that was possible, and that's how we got to 28, which was a huge package that Zelensky didn't like, pretty much no one liked. So now we're at 19. Where do I think we'll settle? Well, if we settle and walk away with this, and they've come to agreement on about 10 to 12 of those points, and the war is stopped, then I think it's a good deal. So it's going to take time, like any negotiation, and anyone that knows this president. He thrives on compromise. He thrives on negotiation. That's, if anything, he likes doing deals more than he likes, breathing.
Don Trump, he was asked about whether Witkoff and Kushner get the sense from Putin that he wants to end the war, that he wants peace. Trump said he would like to end the war. That was their impression. I think that he'd like to get back to dealing with a more normal life. I think he'd like to be trading with the US instead of losing thousands of soldiers a week. Their impression was very strongly that he'd like to make a deal. But Don, most military analysts argue that Putin doesn't want to stop until he takes Ukraine, until he takes more of Europe, and that he needs to keep the war going in order to stay in power. So what do you make of that?
Well, let's face it. The war is what is giving Putin his sense of security right now. But you have to realize, every country, no matter which country you are, has a limited amount of resources. So much that Putin has had to tap into a lot of the allies, the few allies that he has with North Korea and China, who really under this president and this administration don't want to get that involved. So when you're launching thousands and thousands of drones. You've lost, 1.2 million lives. That's Ukraine and Russian over 4 years, and you've exhausted your country's economy and your military base. And what in a year you've gained 1% of what you've been fighting for. That's not really good odds, not really good math. So just like what we saw in Afghanistan, decades ago with Russia and their fights. At some point, no matter how bad your dreams are and your visions, your economy just can't keep up. And I think that's what Putin's soon about to face is his resources and his economy just can't support this anymore.
There's been a lot of back and forth between Europeans working with Trump, and German magazine Der Spiegel obtained a transcript of a conference call of top European leaders and Vladimir Zelensky. They were discussing the United States' role in negotiations. So this transcript, according to those who have seen it, claimed that the conversations see French President Emmanuel Macron warning that the US could abandon Ukraine on security demands. It sees German Chancellor Friedrich Merz repeatedly saying that Zelensky needs to be careful and that the US might be playing games. And then Alexander Stubb says that we mustn't leave Ukraine and Vladimir alone with these guys, referring to Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. So what's your response to that?
I look at all these conversations, and if you read all the transcripts, I was reading this morning about the conversation between China's President Xi and Macron. You know, negotiations like this, they're an opportunity for a power grab. Anybody that has the opportunity to look like they're the hero or the shining knight, they're gonna jump on this. You know, to be honest, the United States' interests in ending the Ukraine war are similar. but in a lot of ways different than what Europe wants, what NATO wants. So everyone has different interests at stake in who gets what in this deal. But ultimately, what we should really think about is who's the true winner here, and that's got to be the people of Ukraine, putting an end to this battle that's been going on for 4 years and exhausting resources across the globe, and tapping into the economies of a lot of NATO countries. But I think Macron's looking to be the hero here. He's had his own troubles at home. It's a good time to look good in the press. It's a good time to make good points with your polls. So they all want to grab something, and I think that's what we have to think about right here. Who we want the real winner to be, and who's just trying to look good on TV.
Well, on the note of Ukrainians being the winner, Don, Trump told reporters that Ukraine has no cards yet again, and that they'd missed the chance to make a deal. He said that now they've got a lot going against them. But only a few months ago, Trump said that Ukraine was winning the war and they could take back all the land that they lost to Russia. So, how do you see this situation as a former militant yourself?
Well, one thing I'll start with, what Trump said yesterday, what Trump said today, and what Trump said a week ago. They're likely going to change. So I don't look about what Trump said. It's what's Trump saying, because that's the mood of the day, and that's what we have to look. Where is the thought process is. I, even when he said, Putin's his best friend and all that, if you want to climb in bed with someone, you're not going to call him a creep. So I think that's Trump's way of just making this move forward. I think deep down, if it's not the president, I think this administration, especially Secretary Rubio, they want to put an end to this. Ukraine, much different than Russia, has access to a lot more assets and a lot more resources for a country their size than Russia does. And where Russia doesn't have the constant inflow of support, whether it's from the United States or many of the NATO countries, no one ever expected, especially not Putin. Putin never expected this to go on and last this long. He thought Ukraine would just be a lifeless dog that would roll over, and this would be over in a week or so. And like I said, here we are 4 years later. Ukraine is still fighting strong. They're a very proud people, and they love their country, and you can't blame them.
Don, and I'm sure you've been looking at this a lot, but there's been a lot of Republicans kind of jumping on the side of Ukraine. Not that the Trump administration wasn't, but they're standing firm on the fact that they want the administration to be helping Ukraine, providing more aid, being a little bit more supportive in the public eye. We saw former House Speaker, former Republican Congressman Gingrich tweet this. He said that with the insulting attitude Putin continues to have about demanding Ukraine surrender instead of as truce, the only realistic strategy is for the US and its European allies to vastly expand military aid to Ukraine and to approve Ukrainian deep strikes inside Russia to raise the cost of war to Putin until he agrees to truce. Now, this is in conjunction with Republican Congressman Don Bacon writing that it is beyond time to send Ukraine cruise missiles and also to pass tough secondary sanctions to cripple Putin's war economy. Should and are Republicans, do you think, quietly pressuring Trump to expand this military aid, including giving Ukraine these cruise missiles?
Absolutely, they are. And one thing I have to say, Zelensky is an excellent lobbyist, and he's done a phenomenal job. If he doesn't get the conversation to go his way at the White House, he's very good. His embassy is excellent about going to the Capitol Hill to meeting with members and expressing their interest in what they want to do. So they've done a great job of trying to win friends, to gain allies on Capitol Hill, and that's what it takes. Anytime you want to do something in Washington, you've got to learn how to play both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue, and not just Democrats and not just Republicans, but to find allies on both sides of the aisle. And I think Zelensky's doing a great job of that. You don't agree always with his tactics, but as he himself, where Trump is the great salesman, Zelensky has become a great marketer.
Do you think that this will work, and do you think that Trump will listen to his fellow Republicans about providing more aid?
I don't think Trump's ever, in private come out and said he doesn't want to support Ukraine. I think that when he says these things publicly, he's using that as a tool of negotiation, to maybe gain favor with Putin. I can't speak for what goes on in the president's head, but I think that's part of his tactics. And many times that we've seen the administration say, we're not going to do this for Ukraine. We're not doing this anymore. And then 2 days later, you'll see a press release that we're sending another package to Ukraine. And and bottom line is all these packages, these support packages that go to whether it's Ukraine, whether it's to Taiwan or Israel, more than half, sometimes 75, 80% of those support deals never leave the United States. So they're great for our economy. They support our industrial base. So it's good for jobs. It's good for manufacturing. It is good for advancement of technology. So I think that there's a way forward for all this, and no one wants this to continue. We've just got to find a way that everyone continues to grow. Like I said in the beginning, we started at 28 points. We're at 19 now. We may end at 12, but if we find peace at 12, then it's still a win for everyone.
On that note, a journalist asked Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, if NATO has a backup plan in case the negotiations fail and the supply of American weapons to Ukraine stops. So he replied saying, I don't have one. I don't think we should be thinking about a plan B. Now, I mean, is that concerning to have the head of NATO say that there is no backup plan given how unpredictable Trump has been?
Absolutely, that's discerning. I think any general, any leader should have a backup plan. I mean, whether you're leading a company, leading a country, or leading an army, you should have a backup plan. Nothing is constant in this world. I think in the Pentagon, there is a backup plan and a backup plan to the backup plan for every country and every contingency in the world. So for him to publicly say that, I hope that was a slip or a misstep because. Um, you never know whether it's Trump or any other president that may can't come in. I think the longitude of NATO has to be with a lifeline of backup plans.
Don, late last week, what the Washington Post published a report that detailed that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth had ordered a strike on a suspected drug smuggling boat in the Caribbean in September that killed around 11 people. So, people familiar with this operation said that after two people survived on that boat, Hegseth then ordered a second strike with the directive to kill everybody. So, these two men were then reportedly blown apart in water. So even at the time of this event in September, it was met with backlash. But what's your reaction to this report that he went after them again?
Well, that's come out that that decision was made by Admiral Bradley, and as I've said earlier in the week, um, decisions like that, and decisions that you make in combat are decisions that have to be made in a nanosecond. And, it's really easy to sit back and make decisions and accusations if you don't know all the facts. And I think that we've got to have the investigations that we were speaking of earlier so that we understand, okay, what was happening, what really was going on. Let's look at the videos because we have a lot of videos and what was going on when that decision was made before we start casting, sides about. The the Capitol, they received what 16 different classified briefs so far on this and the other incidents in the Caribbean waters. I think it's too early to tell. Hexit did say that it was Admiral Bradley who made that decision. Admiral Bradley has claimed forward that he made that decision. So let's dive deeper into it, not to use a nautical term. But before we start making accusations, I think we really need to sit down and maybe have a closed door hearing, ask the right questions, and ask them to get to the bottom of the situation, not so that we can have certain members of Congress go out and get the best tweet of the day. I think that damages everyone and it clouds judgment.
Well, it's clearly a problem within the Republican Party because even though, as you said, it was Admiral Bradley who said that it was his choice, but of course, Pete Hegseth is the Secretary of War, as the Trump administration would call it. Now, a former conservative judge who worked with Pete Hegseth for 7 or 8 years has said that it was an act of war crime. And then you have Rand Paul coming out that basically saying that we need proof that these people were armed, that they are the narco terrorists. So Rand Paul said that if they're not armed, explain to us why we kill people who are not armed. It's a dangerous fantasy. It bypasses due process, shreds constitutional limits, and pushes America towards another unnecessary foreign war.
Well, I mean, since Rand Paul is my senator, I feel okay to say this. It's hard to decide which day Rand Paul's a Republican and which day he's not. So he moves all over the spectrum. He is not truly a Republican. He's a libertarian, and I respect his views. Um, I just think that everyone wants to jump pool. They want to get in front of this. They want to take sides. I really truly believe that uh, if we're preventing drugs from coming into this country, then we're doing the right thing. That is a huge problem. Venezuela, Colombia alone, that's $8 billion in revenue a year for those two countries. Uh, for Venezuela, if it's a true country that wants law and order in its country, supporting narco terrorism and supporting the drug trade is not a really a good way unless you're making cash off of it yourself. So I would welcome the support, but there's a lot to be said here. Look, review where do we get the intelligence? The Pentagon is providing information and briefs to the Capitol on what's going on, where they're getting this information. They have to be very careful, even though they're classified, that some member may go out and leak, and then that endangers the lives of other sailors and other Marines who are carrying out these operations. It's a fine line. They are trying to be transparent. There's been many meetings with Secretary Rubio, Secretary Hexas, trying to brief this to Congress, but both sides have to ask the right questions and pertinent questions before they come out and just want to say that they've got a tidbit for the day.
Well, on that note, Don, this does come in conjunction with the fact that Pete Hegseth, he's had a tumultuous, I guess, start to his post, but it does come just a few days after a report from the Pentagon Inspector General found that Hegseth could have endangered troop safety when he used messaging app Signal in March to discuss war plans with militants in Yemen. So, I mean, are these the kind of things that get someone fired?
I think if he was going to be fired, he would have already have been fired. And I like, and you did it yourself. All these reports from the Inspector General, they say may have, could have. There's a lot of variables, and when you say it's like, okay, you did something bad, but did you really do something bad? And I understand, from times when we were bringing a lot of the evacuees out of Afghanistan, Signal was the only source of communications that was reliable at that time. Signal is used, around the world by military officers on the ground, by intelligence officers. It may not be the best, but it's the most reliable at times. So a lot of people use it, and it's not like we're using Yahoo Chat or something, but
Yeah, I know, Don, but those conversations are reserved for the Situation Room.
well, they are, but like, I mean, I'll get, when we were talking to our allies in Afghanistan, trying to get them out of Afghanistan, they didn't have the resources to go to the Situation Room, so we were using uh, Signal then to relay information, back to Washington. So it's been going on for years. When Pete was, with Mike Waltz, I had, Mike Waltz in a chat group at one time many, many years ago, before he was, in Congress. So I think people accepted that as the norm, and not saying it's the best thing, but it was the tool that we got used to.
But now that we've seen all this controversy surrounding Peter Hegseth, does it kind of question why we saw Mike Waltz, I guess, step down or be removed in May as his role as the national security advisor? Because he essentially, I guess, took the fall for that signal gate.
He took the fall, but I think he ended up okay. I mean, I looked at that. Yeah, I don't think that was a very bad deal.
No,
I mean,
he certainly wasn't punished for it. Don, just finally, we mentioned the Pentagon. The New York Times has filed a lawsuit against the Pentagon for infringing on constitutional rights for journalists. So this is a reference in back in October, the Pentagon started requiring reporters to sign forms that limited their access and sources, even blocked reporters from, I guess, freely walking around the offices to get scoops and speak to people. So do you think this is fair?
well, the Pentagon, having worked there for a number of years, is a beast of its own. And even when you're cleared for the Pentagon, you don't have full access. Um, I think we've got to look at again. You need to look at how is the New York Times overgeneralizing these statements. Um, there are areas that are allowed for reporters and not allowed, and in the past administration, a lot of those barriers were taken down. People got very comfortable walking around. So are they new barriers? Or are they just the returning of barriers that were there in place before, that people had gotten used to not being there? Lawsuits are easy. That's the one thing about the United States. I can file a lawsuit against any neighbor of mine today, and they can file one back tomorrow. It's just, $25, a trip to the courthouse.
Don Bramer, thank you for joining the Trump Report.
Thank you.